I'm Peter Austin, these are animal fashion accessories, and this is interesting. Right, I now need to go and wash the fish oil off my fingers, bear with me. In 2010, a chimpanzee named Julie at the Chimpanzee Wildlife Orphanage in Zambia began habitually wearing a piece of grass inside her ear, a bit like that. It was a curious behaviour, not least because there was no discernible reason why it would in any way benefit the chimp, but what was even more curious was that 7 other chimps in her group subsequently copied this behaviour in a manner reminiscent of human FADS, and they even kept it up after Julie's death in May 2013. The story got stranger still when, over a decade later, a different group of chimps at the same sanctuary who had never had any interaction at all with the original set started doing exactly the same thing. The conclusion of researchers was that both groups may have copied the behaviour from their caretakers, who occasionally used a matchstick or a piece of grass to clean their ears, but in a way, the source of the habit isn't really the important bit. What scientists are most interested in is the social transmission of a behaviour that has no real purpose or practical benefit. It's ostensibly a trend or a fashion, and as it turns out, chimpanzees might not be the only ones doing this sort of thing, which brings us on to today's rather bizarre topic of Orca salmon hats. In 1987, in a pod of killer whales from the northeast Pacific known as K-pod, a single female was observed carrying a whole dead salmon around on her head. Bit weird. Now, of course, orcas are actually members of the oceanic dolphin family and are known to be quite playful. For instance, they've been observed throwing smaller animals around with no intention of actually eating them. Lovely. But again, the important thing is not so much why the whale chose to balance a dead fish on its head, but that others started to do the same thing. Within 2 months, the behaviour of wearing a dead salmon as a hat was observed not just in other members of K-pod, but in members of 2 other pods in the same region. Truly, it appeared that a fashion for dead salmon hats had spread amongst multiple groups of orcas in the northeast Pacific. And just like any other fad, it didn't appear to be in vogue for very long. Seemingly the peak of the trend was in the summer of 1987, and rather amusingly, only a handful of instances were recorded in the summer of '88 before the behaviour stopped entirely, because, you know, there's always a few squares wearing last year's fashions, right? But you know what they say about fashion? Wait round long enough and it all comes round again. And that's exactly what happened with salmon hats. In 2024, nearly 40 years on from the original occurrences, orcas in the same region went into the back of their wardrobes and pulled out their dusty old 80s headwear for a second run. Indeed, it's actually been suggested that the resurgence of this fad might have been started by old-timers who were around for that first instance. But unlike chimps wearing grass in their ears, there are a couple of theories as to how there might be some practical benefit to this behaviour. It might be the orca's way of carrying surplus food around to eat later on, it could be some sort of social display that impresses other members of the pod, or it might even be more akin to a game rather than a fashion. But once again, the most intriguing part of this phenomenon is the mere presence of these trends amongst social animals like orcas and chimpanzees. The more we look at the animal kingdom, the more we realise we're nothing special. To the uninitiated, it might seem like all kinds of things separate us from the animals. Tools, laughter, grief, art, use of complex language. But to name just a few examples, apes and corvids use tools. Happy rats laugh at ultrasonic frequencies. Elephants appear to mourn their dead. Bowerbirds create incredible ornamental displays. And prairie dogs can transmit unbelievably complex semantic information in their alarm calls, describing a predator's species, size, shape, colour, and speed. In fact, there's even evidence to suggest they have distinct calls for whether or not a human is carrying a gun. Take all of this and then add fads and fashion into the mix, and the conclusion is clear. Humans really are just apes with smartphones and taxes. Oh, and some of us are also sheep too. What? Everyone else is doing it. I've been Peter Austin, and that was interesting.